Welcome back. This is Lesson 8 for How to Compose Music 101, brought to you by artofcomposing.com. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to put the finishing touches on your completed piece of music. Now, in order to do this, we're going to look back at the final version, but without the analytical marking. Now, up till now, we've talked about writing simple melodies based on chord tones, along with using passing tones and neighbor tones. We've talked about how to use functional harmony to create logical chord progressions, and we've also talked about form, and in particular, this piece here is in small ternary form. But there's clearly more happening on this page, and that's what this final lesson is about, everything else. Now, our goal here is to create music, and music is normally played by people. Although nowadays it may be more common to hear a computer performance, we still strive to have real people play our music. And because of this, everything we put on a page should in some way contribute to that. So this lesson is going to be a little bit different from the first 7 in that I'm going to just do this in real time on the computer and make some changes to this piece. So let's get started. So I have a few guidelines that I like to think about when I'm trying to finish off a piece so that it's presentable to other people. First thing that I like to do is make sure that I've got all of the basics down on the page. So, things like having a title, having a copyright, making sure your name is on here as the composer. Those are the kind of things that, let people know who's written the music and what they can kind of expect from it. With a title like Bagatelle Number 1, chances are it's going to sound like a short classical piece. If it's Symphony Number 1, you're going to expect something different. And then probably the more important things are the tempo markings. Now, I like to put both, a word like allegro and an actual beats per minute here because it really gets rid of the ambiguity on the tempo. If you were to just put allegro, then it doesn't guarantee that somebody's going to play it at the tempo that you imagined it. Now, you may want that. You may want a little bit more variety with interpretation from different performances. However, most of the time when you hear something in your head, that's exactly how you want it to be performed as well within reason. So that's why I like to put a real beats per minute. Another thing is you want to make sure that you've got bar numbers here. Now, for a short classical piece like this, at the beginning of the system is fine, but it is common to put more bar numbers like over every bar, especially if this is for production, like you're recording for a film or something like that. Another thing you want to think about is the actual size of the notation. So in most notation programs, you can choose the size of the staff. I can make it smaller like this, but when you make it smaller, it becomes difficult to read sometimes, depending on how far away the person is from the page, or maybe their eyesight's not very good. So I like to go up a little bit larger, around 0.28 inches or so. There's some standard sets of sizes, but generally you just want to make sure it's big enough to read. Now from here, the next thing that I'm concerned with is that the form of the piece kind of jumps off of the page. Now let me explain what I mean. If we're looking at this piece of music right now, it's not very clear just by looking at it what's going on. Now, you can try to hum through the melody, you can try to figure it out from dynamics and stuff, but really, the way we shape the page can do a lot in terms of how somebody interprets the music. And let me show you here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start aligning these bars so that they're on one system, meaning that they just go across on one line on the page, so that it actually matches the form of the piece. And in this case, I know that I've got a 4-bar phrase here as this first one. So I can select all of these bars, and I can put them on one line or one system. What this really does for me is that looking at 4 bars in one system, I can clearly delineate the phrase. It starts here, it ends here, and then this is the upbeat to the next phrase. If I were to not follow this rule, let's say I wanted to put 8 bars, or let's do something odd like 7 bars. It just looks, well, for one, this looks really cluttered, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but let's do something small. Let's do 3 bars. It doesn't really help with interpretation. Maybe I think, oh, look, you've got a crescendo there to the forte, and then it looks like an upbeat there. Maybe it's just a 3-measure phrase. So ultimately, what we want to do is we want the music to just jump off the page to the person playing it. So I'm going to continue going through here, and I'm going to do this for the different phrases. Now with the contrasting middle, it's a little bit different. If I were to do the entire contrasting middle, to me that's a little bit bunched up. So I'm going to break it up. We could do maybe these first three like that, or that even looks a little odd. Maybe something like that. These are kind of busy bars here, and these are a little bit less busy. So ultimately, we want to turn that into as readable as possible. And you can see when I've done this, now I put it on one page instead of 2 pages. So it's instantly a little bit easier to read. In fact, I could probably decrease the size of it a little bit, and I think that is looking pretty good. What that really does for us, once again, is I look at this, that's a phrase. I look at this, that's a phrase. You've got this whole section that's kind of standing on its own, and then you've got this last phrase at the end. To use a program called Sibelius, which is a music notation software, and if you're using Sibelius, it has a couple of features that can really help, that I think every composer should be using. So some of these features are, for instance, the optimized staff spacing, which is under the Layout tab. And what this does is, if your spacing is a little bit messed up, it kind of resets everything. So if I select it all, click Optimize, you can see everything jump back into place. The other one is under the Appearance tab. It's called Reset Note Spacing. And then once again, if you add, or if your spacing on your notation is kind of all out of whack, it will respace it so that it's spaced properly. Beyond this, just using the layout features. So you can turn things into one single system, and that's what I was doing here, where I make it into a system. You can also lock things on the page, so that I could make that into a page, and then any new bars that I create after that go on to the next page. So those are just some of the features that I think everybody needs to be thinking about. And if you've got Finale or MuseScore or any other notation software, it probably has similar features that you could be using. Now, after thinking about the way you shape your page by how many bars are in a system, you can also look at adding some other features to clarify the form. One great thing you can do is add proper bar lines. Now here, obviously, we're kind of limited. We have repeats. So the repeat is going to very clearly delineate one section here, the exposition, and then the contrasting middle and the recapitulation have their own repeat. But if you don't have repeats in yours, you can use the double bar line. That's always a great thing to use to break up the form. And you don't want to overuse it. You don't want to have a double bar line every 4 or 8 bars, but it is something that you can use, for large sections. So there are other ways that we can clarify the form. And one of the best ways to do this is through contrast that we create with our music. The best way to do this is with texture, dynamics, and articulation. So let's talk about each one of those. Now, first off, texture is how thick or thin the music feels. It's not really an exact science. Sometimes you would think like having a bunch of notes is going to necessarily feel real thick, but that may not be the case. For instance, down here, if we have something like that, it feels pretty thick. That's got 4 notes. But if we were to play 4 notes up real high, well, that didn't sound very good. That feels still really thin. A lot of it has to do with the overtones that are being excited. But, we can have still a heavy texture down at the bottom with very few notes, versus having a bunch of notes up high. And if you look throughout the piece, you can see that I like to vary the texture quite a bit. So in this opening bar, we've got a relatively thick chord with a melody in the soprano. It sounds like this. And as the bar, or as the phrase continues, the texture starts to move a little bit thinner. You've got this chord that's moving up in its range. The melody's moving lower down. And then in this third bar here, it thins out to only 2 voices when finally in the last bar, you've got just a single note in the bass and then now chords in the melody. So you can see that each bar is really changing kind of drastically the texture that we're using, but it does help to shape the phrase, especially once we go back to the original texture in bar 6. So let's hear this. Now, as we get on to the contrasting middle section, I basically have one texture that I use throughout, which in itself gives it contrast from the exposition, which had many different textures. Here I'm hitting a pedal in the bass, and I've got a melody that's in thirds or, harmonized with one other voice. So let's hear how this sounds. And then finally, as you get down to the bottom here, I've done something special with the melody. So you can see it's harmonized with only one other voice, but it's harmonized in a very special way. Let's listen to it real quick. Now, this sound you may have heard before and you're not sure exactly what it's called. It goes by the name of horn fifths, and it sounds like this. It's got that very regal, majestic sound. And there's a history behind this. Originally, horns were only able to play on one single overtone series at a time. They didn't have their chromatic valve system that they have now. And so if you wanted them to play in harmony, it would end up doing something like this. Just because that's all they could do. If they wanted to change key, they actually had to change the tubes on the horn, pull something out, and put something new in to be in a new key. But what this has led to is that people really like that sound because it was used so often, especially in the classical period. And then finally, this last bar, or the last two bars here, I change it up a little bit and I double up the bass to give it a little bit thicker texture. So let's hear that. There's no confusion that that's the end of the piece. It's, a little bit wider spaced. You've got the double octaves in the bass, and you've got the chords in the right hand. So that's what I'm doing with the texture. The next one is dynamics. Now, dynamics are another great way to shape the feel of the piece. As you can see, I start with a mezzo forte here, and then I drop it down to piano, and then it moves back up now to forte in this last bar of the first phrase, and then I kind of repeat that. What this does, once again, is help shape the form, help shape the piece. I create more contrast in the middle here by just keeping mezzo forte throughout, and then at the end I change it up finally with the forte throughout the entire recapitulation, moving up to a fortissimo right at the end, and it just, once again, it kind of signals that, oh, this is the end. Finally, we get to the articulations. Now, with articulations, I like to look at these as more the small scale. So I'm not really as concerned with the entire theme or the entire phrase. I'm more concerned with how each bar and each idea sounds as a complete unit within itself. Now, on a piano, you're limited somewhat on your articulations versus if you're composing for, say, a violin or a woodwind, which has quite a bit more control over the individual note. But you do have differences, between having staccato notes or legato notes, or hitting it really hard or hitting it really soft. For instance, those all sound pretty different in their effect. So as you can see here, I get real detailed. Da, da. I want this note to be short here. And then in the next phrase, I've got the two staccato notes over the eighth notes. It's just giving itself a little bit of variety. A lot of it has to do with how much listening that you've done to great music, because great composers end up performing a lot and hearing their music played and making changes as they go along. And so you can absorb that by listening to lots of music. You understand how phrasing works, when staccato notes are going to be appropriate, when legato notes are going to be appropriate. And the fact is, most music can handle lots of different articulations and a lot of different stylings on it. So a lot of times, just play around with it. See what it sounds like if you've got a staccato or slurred or legato or any other type of articulation that you can handle. So that basically does it for the details. We've taken care of, all the required stuff on the page. We've set up the system so that they, make the form pop. We've controlled the texture of the piece and the dynamics and the articulations so that it all clarifies the form and it helps a player interpret the music in the way the composer wants it to sound. So let's listen to this one last time and just really try to listen to the way every element is helping to shape the form of the piece. Okay, so that does it for the free beginners composing course from artofcomposing.com. If you want to sign up and get the worksheets for this, head on over to artofcomposing.com/free. You can sign up there and you'll get an email that takes you to the course page where I've got, links to all these different videos, and you get the worksheets plus a little bit of extra definitions and things like that. I hope you enjoyed the course. If you did, head on over to artofcomposing.com. And also, if you're interested in something a little bit more in depth, head on over to academy.artofcomposing.com, where I have a much longer, fully featured Music Composition 101 course. It goes over a lot of the same concepts, but it's about 8 hours long. So it's a much more in-depth college level type course where I talk much more about harmony, more about creating melodies, about adding accompaniment to your piece. We get real in depth on form, and it's just a great place to learn how to compose. So I will see you there. Until next time.